Good. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Halfie Project Podcast. Well, it has certainly been a while since you have gotten a new episode from us. I would officially like to welcome you to Season 2 of the podcast. My name is Becky. If this is your first time tuning in, the Halfie Project Podcast is where we discuss mixed race culture and the experience and what does that look like for people all over the world. And we delve deeper into those kind of topics that are related to mixed race, mixed culture, third culture kids, adoptee stories, and the like. Well, if you are checking out our YouTube channel, The Halfie Project, you might see that we actually are on camera. And so the podcast has been in the audio format for Season 1. And now in Season 2, we have the video format. So welcome, more of you visual listeners, let's say. And well, I have a special announcement. One, it's Season 2, and we're glad to have you. But my second announcement is we have a new podcast co-host, and I would like for you to meet him once again for Season 2. Cedric Skycedi, welcome to the studio!
Woo! Hello. What is up, everybody?
You know, you look like a sportscaster right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I feel like if you had a suit and tie, then you would just be like, really like, I'm ready to.
Oh, that would be dope.
Here he goes, running down the field, to the left. It would be something
I would
like
not
that.
know what I'd be doing.
I know, I'd just be making things up as well. But yeah, welcome to Season 2.
Thank you. It's good to be here. This is official. I'm a little nervous. I'm not going to lie.
This is actually official.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird, honestly.
Yeah, and I definitely have big shoes to fill since I'm coming in after Jay, who was the greatest co-host for sure. Mm-hmm. Shouts out to Jay.
Yeah, well, everyone already knows that if they listen to our last episode of Season 1. Mm-hmm. But so on Season 2, what can you expect from the Halfie Project? We have always had guests, and we will continue having guests. And of course, the new co-host. And also, we're going to get a little bit more, I guess, research heavy, I think, in this season. Yeah. Because I realize there's so many questions people have, and there's so much history into mixed race culture. Right. And those stories. And so I feel like we kind of have an obligation. If we're going to tell these stories, we should tell them right.
Right. And I'm really looking forward to that because I'm looking forward to really learning and growing.
We're going to learn a lot.
Oh, I think so.
While we're doing this. Yeah, so it's quite a burden. Not a burden. That's not the right word. But it's a responsibility,
It is
a responsibility. Yeah, and so I hope we're up to the task.
Yeah, I think we are.
Yeah, and thanks for you guys who have been with us since the beginning, and we hope that this is going to be even better coming in.
Definitely.
So for some of our listeners who might not recognize you from your own YouTube channel, Skycedi, you should trot over there and take a look because you're going to learn something new.
Subscribe, like, comment.
Skycedi, right? That's his YouTube channel. Well, you will recognize that I am often on that channel.
Right. You are literally now a permanent part of the channel.
For good reason. What is that reason, sir?
Well, we happen to be dating. Yeah. Is that where you wanted me to go?
Yes, that's exactly where I wanted you to go. Yeah. So that is the fact.
Yeah. I mean, because my channel has been about mostly cultural related things as it pertains to me being half Korean, Black and Korean. And so, you know, after we started dating, I mean, you're someone who's used to being on camera, who's used to hosting shows on, off camera, things like that. And I thought it would be perfect for you to just be a part of the channel.
Thank you, sir.
And I think you really elevated it, to be honest. Oh. And I think you're way more, I think you're a better on-camera personality than I am. So I think you're raising the bar for the channel and for me.
Well, my compliment box just got filled to the brim.
Yes, I got some points for that one.
So why did I bring that up? Well, just so that people know who we are. And also because though this episode is just kind of the intro to Season 2, I thought we could chat a little bit about dating expectations for mixed Koreans. Ooh. Or I guess that's the perspective we'll bring. Yes, dating expectations for people of all mixed races, but in our regard, because we're mixed Korean, I thought this could be a fun topic because people ask, at least ask me very often, like, oh, well, do you want to marry a white guy? You want to marry a Korean guy? Right. You know, and it seems to be like those are the only two races available to me.
Right. Totally.
Yeah. Did you get those questions?
I did, yes. But I think for me, naturally, because for those of you guys that can't see me, I am half black. So I think naturally more people would ask if, I'm going to marry or date a black person or a Korean person. Yeah.
Did people more often, let's say in the States, did people more often ask you about Korean or black?
I would say a mixture of both. It just depends on who.
Just who's asking you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever ask your mom what she would have preferred?
I never outright asked her, to be honest, but I have a hunch in terms of what she would prefer.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that hunch would be someone that she's comfortable with culturally. Yeah, I think for her, it's important that, her children, one, get married to or date someone who they connect well with and, they have a mutual respect and love for each other, but then also someone that she can feel comfortable with. And I think that's natural for probably any parent.
I would say so. And it might sound a little ironic, like your mom having married your dad, who's black, who's not Korean. It would be very, let's say, almost hypocritical of her to turn around and say to you, like, oh, you can only marry a Korean girl, right? But at the same time, it's very understandable.
Right.
Especially if you see, like, people who are in mixed interracial marriages, they face a very unique set of difficulties. And maybe they have learned through that, and then they're like, oh, I don't want my children to have to go through the same difficulties that I encountered, right? So coming at it with an angle of understanding, for sure. It's a funny question though, because I feel like when you are mixed race, it does put you somewhat in, there are different boxes, right? But let's say if you're a white person, I doubt that people just ask you like, so you're going to marry a white girl? You know what I mean? Like,
right. I mean, it's just expected, right?
I don't really know, to be honest, because I never ever had people asking me, let me backtrack. People had asked me, like, would you ever date a black guy? They would ask me that more out of an angle of curiosity and recognizing that white people in the States often have problems with this racist issue, right? Black and white. And also Koreans also have some racist attitudes towards black people. So when people ask me that question, it was usually out of like, but would you, like coming from your kind of background?
Right.
And I felt like it was more with this kind of nuances to the question, as opposed to genuinely just like, oh, well, isn't that just an option for you? You know what I mean? Does that make any sense?
It does make sense.
It's a bit long-winded.
No. It does make sense. I think that people do it subconsciously, not meaning any harm. But like for me, whenever I hear that coming from the black and Korean perspective, it's almost low-key offensive.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because it's like, why wouldn't she date a black guy? Or why wouldn't she date the, black mixed Korean? So for me, it is sort of I wouldn't even say backhanded compliment because there's no compliment in that. I just think it's a little offensive and slightly hurtful because you are, through that question, essentially saying that black people are either not a good fit for someone like you, or you should just stick within your own race.
Right.
Yeah. And, to be fair, I think a lot of black people feel like you should just stay within black relationships. And there are different reasons why.
Sure.
And I can totally understand that. But outside of that, I think it's more like, the black person is, they just have these lists of stereotypes in their head, or just these negative things or perspectives about black people.
Right.
And I think that's where the question is birthed from.
Right. This is really what it comes down to. Because I feel like if you're asking this question and you're genuinely curious, like, really? Do you think you guys would get on? Do you think you would have trouble socially? Like, they're coming from a genuinely curious standpoint. That's significantly different than somebody asking from the standpoint of like, well, black and Korean people, you guys don't get on. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's a very different, let's say, feeling to the question. So then let me ask you this. Did you ever think you were going to date someone who is mixed Korean?
Ooh, good question.
I know my answer
already. Yeah. So let me think. Because to be honest, I went through phases of different girls that I thought I would date, or different girls that I had certain attractions to. And I'll just right off the bat say I was attracted to pretty much any and everyone who was pretty. right?
Okay.
But I think as I got older, the cultural element became more important for me.
Right.
And that was more of a consideration. So, but I have to be honest, I don't necessarily think that I imagined myself with a mixed person. And I think that was probably more, not because I was against it, it was probably because more, there aren't as many mixed people compared to, I guess, quote unquote, fully ethnic people.
Sure.
Yeah. So I didn't really imagine myself, but of course I was open to it. She's pretty, I dated her.
I never, ever thought that I would. I think it just wasn't even in my radar because I think one, yes, there are so many. In my case, I rarely ran into half Koreans like me, and I considered very much my parents. So I always thought either I will, as I got older, that I would date somebody who is Korean but spent a significant amount of time overseas. I was hoping British. Because I love the accent. That's the only thing. Purely, that's it, aesthetic only. But either that, or I was thinking of Kyopo, like someone who's Korean American, like who had Korean parents, spoke Korean, understand that, but had grown up in the States.
Right.
This was, eventually I had reached this point where I was like, yeah, that's probably all I will date. Because I was thinking, again, on the cultural standpoint and taking my parents into great consideration.
Right.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by taking your parents into consideration when you say that?
Because I want my parents to feel comfortable and have somebody they could talk to and also relate to.
Sure.
This is, I thought, to be very important. Because for me, family is really important, right? So I really want my parents to feel comfortable with whoever may end up becoming part of the family, right? And I wanted my mom to feel like she could talk to him on her own personal level as Korean, in Korean language, right? So she doesn't feel this separation.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I would want my dad to also be able to speak to him on that same level.
Right.
So I guess I'm demanding quite a lot, to be honest.
No, I think that's quite normal, to be honest with you. I think especially... that's reflected in Korean families, for sure. I mean, that's why I think a lot of Koreans stick within the Korean race because of their parents and considering, the comfort of the
It's a very high
parents.
context culture.
Yeah.
It's hard to teach somebody these little things.
Right. But I think even like in the West, I think that's pretty common. You would want, you would want your, significant other to get on well with your parents, that type of thing. I mean, that's not to say that everyone is like that, because I think a lot of people are very individualistic in that, it's like, I'm just going to date who I want to date. Right. If I connect well with them, and that's fine. That's just one way of doing it. But a lot of people do consider their families. Yes,
people do consider their families. I feel like in the Korean family, they consider it far significantly higher.
Sure.
To the point of like, my parents don't accept you, we can't get married. But I feel in the US or many Western cultures, it will be like, well, I'm the one marrying him, not you. So you just have to deal with it.
Right.
I have a hard time conceding. I think at some point I would have thought that way, but I have a hard time now to concede with that, And so I feel that the parents have a very huge impact on that decision.
Right.
Who you date and who you end up marrying. Dating and marriage is different anyway.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But the older that I get, the more I realize the importance of considering family when it comes to my relationships. Because in my 20s, I didn't consider that wasn't the main thing that I thought about when picking somebody to date. It was more, who do I get along with and who do I like? And then hopefully molding that into something that my family can, hopefully accept and appreciate. But I learned the hard way that doesn't always happen. Sometimes it does, but in my case, it didn't. And from, one of my relationships where I really learned that lesson from, at that point, I was like, you know what? I'm going to date someone who, number one, I feel more connected to, that we can relate. And then number two, my mom, because my father at the time, he was already, God rest his soul, he was already gone. But my mom, for someone that she can connect to and actually communicate with. Because my mom she could speak English, but it's very difficult for her to have a very extended, fluent conversation. You know, so someone that understood Korean culture, someone that could speak Korean preferably. It's very important for me.
So bring this around. Bring this around to mixed marriages. We already acknowledge, even for ourselves, we would want a partner who could relate to our parents, mom and dad, and their cultures and language respectively.
Yeah.
So when we come down to mixed marriages, somebody, let's say, who's Black and then Korean, and they don't speak each other's language fluently, then it becomes inevitable that those same issues are going to crop up in the marriage too, right? This language boundaries and not fully understanding each other's culture and that kind of thing. So what then do you do in those kind of circumstances? You're going to have people who say like, we didn't get on, so we divorced because we just couldn't understand each other's culture. We couldn't get each other linguistically. We couldn't communicate fully well. We know in marriage, a bedrock is good communication. So it's very hard to deal with those kind of questions when you're considering mixed marriages, because then if you think about that, you would have to say, okay, well then just marry within your own culture and race.
Right.
You know what I mean? So this is such a strange dichotomy that we now being mixed are like, oh, well, as long as I have somebody to communicate with both. But wasn't that the same thing with your parents' case?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're talking different generations here of how mixed race couples, especially when there's language differences and, you know, strong cultural differences, and how they handled and viewed that. Because for my parents, they were able to communicate fine. I think they learned how to communicate with each other. The way my dad used to speak to my mom was very simple and in a way that she understood. And the way my mom communicated to my dad is in broken English. And the way I saw it is they communicated just fine. I think also the values of marriage back in the 80s and 90s were a little different than generally speaking than today. In other words, I see a lot of couples who maybe went through those communication issues, like mixed marriages, that stayed together. Even despite that, even though they had issues because of communication or cultural differences, they stayed together, whether it was for the kids or just because they believed in the value of marriage and staying together no matter what. Whereas I think these days, younger couples, they have more of a luxury to just say, you know what, if we don't connect, I'll just get a divorce and find somebody else who I can connect well with. So I think, I don't know, I feel like older couples stuck together more, even through those difficult situations. I mean, there were times where my parents didn't understand each other, but they stuck it through. And that, to me, was the beautiful part of their relationship. It was a beautiful thing to see that despite the differences, they tried to understand each other and they made efforts.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think people these days, generally, I don't think they have that same sort of commitment mindset. And again, I'm not saying everybody, you know, but I do see way more breakups in relationships and divorces in relationships because of a lot of these issues.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't have stats or numbers on that.
Right.
But it will be very interesting to look into, let's say, the percentage of mixed marriages that lasted in the 80s and 90s versus what are lasting today.
Right. I wonder if there are, you know, studies on that.
I wonder, honestly. I don't know if they would, you know?
Right. I mean, because I'm just thinking of all of because I grew up around so many mixed people, whether it was mixed Koreans or just mixed black and white. That was the nature of growing up around a military base. And so I was able to see like my friends' parents and their interactions and the fact that a lot of them are still together.
Yeah.
And like me with my 2020 mindset, I'm thinking, man, how do they stay together for so long with all of these like barriers of culture or communication?
Yeah.
So I sort of have just that experience to draw from.
We're going to have to bring in some older couples.
And
bring them into the podcast, and we can ask them these questions, right?
Definitely.
Oh, that would be really fun. We ought to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so my follow-up question with that is coming with communication. So you are saying, you know, in your parents' case, your dad was speaking on terms that your mom could understand, simplified language, right? But there are nuances to language, context in language. There's no way we can deny the extreme emotional and I guess you could say like underlining meaning that words carry, that are conveyed through your communication, that you will understand it implicitly because we speak the same language and its language and culture are closely connected. Okay. For people in this regard, I find it to be so difficult to have that deep emotional and mental connection with somebody who does not speak on the same terms or level. Right. I'm kind of playing devil's advocate here because I also have great relationships and friendships with people that we don't speak the same language natively. So I completely understand this. But I think in a romantic context, that is significantly harder. How do you overcome that kind of thing? In this case, do you just have to be like, well, we just can't. This is a part of our relationship, this communication part that just is not part of our relationship. Right. Is that something that you just have to sacrifice if you're going to be in a mixed interracial marriage where you don't speak the same language?
To be honest, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so, because like how else can you catch those nuances of culture or language without understanding it, without sharing that? Yeah. So yeah, I think that is a missing element that a lot of relationships will inevitably have due to that, unless, you know, one or both parties seek to really grow in understanding each other's culture and actually growing in fluency of the language. And, you know better than I do that even being fluent in a certain language, there's still there's a difference between advanced level fluency and native level fluency in catching nuances, and really even like how language shapes how you view life, right? Especially like when with my limited Korean, when I'm speaking or thinking in Korean, I view life and people differently. Sure. So that is also the same in the context of marriage. So if you have like one spouse or one person in a relationship who mainly thinks through that perspective, it's hard for them to effectively communicate their perspective if their significant other doesn't really see life that way, right? Because they can't catch the nuances or don't understand the language in that way, right? So I think that is a challenge. I think that is a missing element that I wouldn't say sad, because again, right? I don't want to diminish the value of your relationship just because you cannot communicate on this level. Exactly. Because again, the perfect example of my parents who loved each other, and I would rather have their relationship than 99% of other relationships that I see and witness, because of their genuine love for each other and the way they try to communicate with each other. But, there are elements that I'm sure that they missed out on because they weren't able to communicate deeply using their words. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So, I mean, I'm with you. Like for me personally, I've been in relationships where, or at least one relationship where I wasn't able to communicate fully because this person wasn't fluent in English. And I could see the struggle of not being able to understand each other, but also I could see the value of you like it because the person's there and you guys at least care about each other. Yeah. So there is some level of right. I don't know. It's very interesting obstacles that are not immediately obvious when you see these mixed relationships, right? Because sometimes you'll look at somebody who they look differently, like, oh, you're going to struggle because of that. You're obviously from different parts of the world. You have different cultures, something. But when it comes to communication and language, I feel like oftentimes we overlook that and we think like, well, as long as we can communicate on a basic level, we'll be fine. I think I'm coming more from my personal perspective because I'm extremely... I'm very language minded. This is how I communicate and view the world is through language. Right. And so in my case, it would be sorely lacking if I could not communicate on this. Right. So I understand. Find the words. You get what I'm saying? Because you would never be fulfilled with somebody that you don't have that linguistic connection with. Sure. Yeah. You just... inside of you as a person, you just wouldn't be fulfilled. Whereas, I even see, I'm thinking of couples in my head right now here in Korea who it's like, a foreigner dating a Korean and they don't understand each other. Like, I mean, they do to a basic level, but they're totally happy.
Right.
And
if
I'm
you're
like,
okay with that.
I'm like, sweet, that's cool. But, some people will never be fulfilled with that. Ever. And I don't even think, I think I could somewhat, but I think there would be always that missing, I wish I could like have deep conversations with them or talk about philosophy or talk about deep things.
Again, I want to repeat, I'm not diminishing the value or strength of a relationship just because you have this additional communication barrier that I feel more keenly than maybe other people do.
Right. Yeah. Not at all. Because again, my parents had one of the best relationships, in my opinion.
But I do think for people who are in mixed relationships now, who are considering marriage, or maybe you're raising mixed kids and you are in that kind of circumstance where you're not speaking the same language fluently, I would just say, from my own personal point of view, my own experiences as well, this is something to take into consideration.
Right.
Something to think about. This is what makes mixed relationships so fascinating. Because it's hard enough as it is if you're speaking the same language fluently.
Right.
Plus these kind of things which are not so obvious. All right. So, basically this whole topic was about dating in mixed relationships.
And that's what makes them so fascinating.
It does make them fascinating. And if you guys have more questions about this, we often get like new couples who are considering raising their Halfie kids and not sure what they have to face or are there things they should consider. If you have those kind of questions, obviously we are not marriage counselors by any means.
No.
Not even by the farthest stretch of the imagination, but this is a topic that we discuss a lot and with a lot of different people. So maybe having these different perspectives can help shape your own perspectives and how you want to continue in your own relationship and your own family. Is there any last, comments that you want to make about this topic?
I just wanted to bring up something real quick, which I think would be interesting to just talk about. We don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but the idea of the expectation of a mixed race person dating one or the other, right?
Yeah.
Do you think it is unfair for someone to have a certain pressure? Like, for example, you can either date white or Korean.
Right.
Outside of that, like, do you feel like that pressure is, justified, or do you feel like?
Okay, this is a good question.
Yeah.
I would say it is justified. I say the question is justified. I would not say it is right. You can be justified on bad reasons. Now let me explain this. It is justified in the fact that all people and the whole world runs on these communities and societies. People you can trust because you're familiar with them. And one of those familiarity markings that we have is the color of your skin. And these physical similarities we have. Hey, you look just like my brother. Oh, I feel safer with you. Right. My family looks like me. That means I belong here. And we all desire this sense of belonging. So I feel like what we're asking with that question when we say, are you going to date a white guy or Korean guy? We're kind of asking, like, which society do you feel like you belong with? Which society do you find more familiarity with that you feel better with?
Right.
And it's easier for us, I think, as humans to identify like that. And so in that regard, I think it's a justified question, because it is easier for us to just acknowledge like, oh, well, you're also white and you're Korean, so you'll probably pick one or the other, right? Because that's where you feel safest. That's where you feel more communal together, where you understand where you fit, right? But do I think it's necessarily correct? No. I do think that it's harder to grasp this. I'm really struggling with words here. It's harder to grasp the idea that you can date outside of your race, just on the face value. But I think that it is wrong on some level to simply say like, well, you have to date one or the other, because by that question, you are saying other races are not, you can't fit with them, or you guys aren't going to get on, or they're not worthy of dating your race.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the reason why I asked that is because, like, for me, I've received personally, when I say personal, I mean like YouTube comments. Personally, usually through the comments, people bashing me because they'll say, oh, you're abandoning your black side.
This is interesting.
Yeah. That's why I wanted to bring it up. You're abandoning your black side. Or what about, the black sisters out here who, because a big thing, and I acknowledge this right here, what I'm about to say, I acknowledge it as a legit feeling, but, they say that a lot of black men date outside of their race, and they're leaving the black women just, there. Yeah. It's like there are plenty of beautiful black women, smart, talented, but they feel abandoned by these black men. And I feel like when they see someone like me, who I am representative of black people too, for the most part, they feel like that I'm probably part of the problem in that. And we can say the same thing I don't know if we can say the same thing for Korean people, because Korean people are not going to be like, oh, you should just date a Korean. They will probably feel more comfortable with me dating a black person or someone else that's non-Korean.
Right.
So there's no winning with I guess my ethnic mix, or cultural mix, I should say. But I think it is interesting because for me, again, I go with who I'm attracted with and who I relate to culturally. Now, before I was way more, I guess, less picky, right? When it comes to that, it was just like, again, whoever I thought was pretty and whoever I could connect with, I'll give it a shot. But now culture is way more important to me. And not that I would, not that I would just rule out anybody else, but I would heavily consider that as, in my decision-making process, whether to date them or not. And so, I think a lot of people, especially in mixed relationships, I think a lot of people who are mixed face that, especially who are mixed with black and something.
Right. Yeah. This, I can't get too much into it because I myself don't know and have not experienced it on that side. But with my limited knowledge on this, I imagine that when it comes to black people in America, it's going to be very different because of the longstanding history. And also also with Asia, and we have white colonization, all of this mixed together. It's different when you're saying like to a white person, you should only date white people. In this case, it's like, well, historically, you guys just do whatever you want.
Right. That's
versus
a good point.
Looking at black people in America uniquely. Black people in America is different than in Africa. There's different history in all of this. It's different to say to black people like, well, you should only date within black people race, right?
Right.
It's totally different kind of question. So yeah, I imagine it's an interesting question for you to get. Or when people have that expectation on you that you should only date within the black race. Yeah,
and it's a unique position for me to be in because, one, I don't want to come across like I am one of those who are just like, because I mean, to a certain extent, I agree with that and I see that. But also, I am a product of a mixed race marriage. That's and so I see the beauty of going outside of just what you always know. Yeah. If that's something that you prefer to do, as long as you're willing to make it work. So, it's just an interesting place to be in because there's different things that I've seen and different perspectives that I've seen that none of them are incorrect.
Right.
They're just different.
Yeah.
And it's like, if I choose one, then, people of the other perspectives may have an issue with that.
That's right.
So at the end of the day, I can't be bothered by, I guess, the opinions of everybody because you can't satisfy everybody.
No, you can't. You can't. This is such an interesting layered topic, really. Because you say like, well, I can't satisfy everyone's wishes. I can't make everybody happy. But let's be honest, you are trying to make somebody happy with who you're dating.
Sure.
You're trying to make your mom happy, right? And this is leaning onto like Korean culture and the Korean society and expectations. This is inevitable because your mom is carrying that in her.
Right.
So I find it to be a lot more difficult when you are, I guess, mixed and you have these interracial parents.
Right.
Intercultural parents, because there's a lot more things you need to consider in that. And no matter what, people on the outside are going to look at you and say like, you should be dating within your own race.
Right.
It's kind of, okay, well, why didn't you tell me what my race is then,
Right.
Yeah. And there's a lot of family dynamics and all of that as well. So for sure, it's a complex topic. And I don't think this is the last time that we're going to discuss it on this podcast. But if this resonated with you in some way or another, or you have a story from your own relationship, please share it with us. We'd love to hear. Honestly, we have a lot of fan mail, but we just don't have time to read it this time. So guys, tune in to the next episode when it releases if you want to hear some fan mail. And if you left us some messages, we read them on the podcast. So you can get your responses here. All right, we're just going to sign off now. Thanks you guys for tuning into the Halfie Project Podcast. And Cedric, any last words to say?
Just remember, guys, to always...
No. We don't use that here.
Okay. Fair enough.
You're now on the Halfie Project. This is our zone.
Okay, gotcha. You guys, if you don't know what I was trying to do, then you need to check out this Skycedi YouTube channel. So I just plugged myself. Cool.
You did just plug yourself.
But yeah, guys, just keep on listening. We've got some interesting topics coming your way, and we're going to get deep into all of these issues.
Right.
And we're going to try to do it in a very well-informed way, but we also are open to learning, so we don't have everything down packed yet, but we're learning and growing all together.
All right, packaged nicely, tied it up with a ribbon and set it off in the mail. Thanks you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast anywhere that you listen to your podcast so you know when the episodes are coming out. We also have the YouTube channel, The Halfie Project. You can see more videos there, plus this podcast in video format if you want to see what we look like and what's going on as we're doing this episode. And make sure you follow us on Instagram as well, at The Halfie Project. You can send us messages there and see more photos and stories and updates in more real time. And if you guys have a message or something you'd like to say, you can send us an email at thehalfieproject@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We are The Halfie Project.